Okay, guys, happy Wednesday. Yes, Wednesday, right? I'm losing track of days. I'm sure you are too. Today is Wednesday that you're watching this. It's Tuesday while I'm recording it, but Wednesday while you're watching this. And before I talk about toxicology, I want to point out that I posted on the main stream, like when you go to the Google Classroom, there's the stream and there's the assignments, a link to a Zoom meeting for today, Wednesday at 3 o'clock. So it's the first time I've ever tried to host a meeting. So I hope I shared the link correctly. There's a code also that's in the post that you'll need. I forget what it is, but you'll just have to write it down or something. Anyway, anybody who wants to join tomorrow, we'll just see how many people jump on. It's kind of a trial run. I don't really have a teaching agenda for tomorrow's meeting at 3. I just want to see if I can get it to work and see how many of you want to participate and just catch up and hear how you guys are doing and just see everybody get to see each other's faces and just kind of just have it be a fun kind of catch up. And then we can just talk a little bit about when would be a good time to do weekly meetings. Do we do them on like Monday mornings to talk about the week coming up? Do we do them on Friday? Well, not Monday mornings. Who am I joking? Who am I kidding? No morning meetings. Afternoons or Friday afternoons to kind of like ask any questions from any assignments from the week or whatever. So we'll just kind of try to play it by ear and see if we can come up with a weekly time for each class, because I think I'm going to have to do those. If we're going to make them learning related where we're asking questions, I'm going to need to limit the size. So we'll do it by class period. So anyway, don't forget 3 o'clock today, Wednesday. Jump on at that link and let's catch up. Okay, so hopefully you have out your something to write with. Again, like I told you guys on Monday, we're working through those homework questions that I posted on Monday. Well, I posted them on Monday, but on Monday, Tuesday combined as Tuesday homework. It was just 3 questions. Today, we're going to actually go through question 9, so 6 more questions. So I really wouldn't put it off if you haven't started it. A lot of you have. You just jumped on, you answered your 3 questions, and you're good, because I can look in Google Drive and see who's completed them. You don't turn it in, like click the turn it in button, because once you turn in a Google document that I have shared with you, you lose all editing ability and you won't be able to reopen it and continue to add questions to it. I think most of you have figured that out. Had a huge mess with my 6th graders, but anyway, so just close out of your Google Drive. It auto saves. We love Google Drive. So anyway, get on today after this, and I will tell you what slides you need to jot down some notes. You can go back and type it in, unless you've printed it out and are just taking notes as you go. That was totally your option. Okay, so we left off. What did we talk about last? Oh, we were talking about all the different people who have famous people, millions of people have died of accidental overdoses. But some famous people, if you didn't jot them down, just kind of flip back through here. That is question 7 that you'll be doing. So some of them, there was that Corey Monteith. He's actually the opening case study in your books. You can open that up and see. There's Heath Ledger, Elvis Presley, Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, Prince. You probably know of others. So I think you have to list about 4. I think 4 is what the question asked you to do. So be sure you jot those down. So as a forensic scientist, what are we doing here for when it comes to evidence detection, collection, and storage of toxins or drugs or dangerous substances? You all know the little canine drug sniffing dog, because we have this little guy come visit our campus regularly. Used to. Okay, sorry. I kind of miss the drug sniffing dog coming, just because I miss being in class. But obviously, people transport illegal drugs all the time. Okay, people transport them through their luggage and shipping containers. They hide them in other products that they're shipping. I mean, drug smugglers are pretty creative. They even have mules, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, and those are people who hide drugs in their body. Either tape them to their body or hide them inside their body. using various body cavities. So that's pretty crazy because sometimes they burst and then people die. So crazy stuff. People are always trying to sneak it. We have these amazing dogs who can sniff that stuff out, sometimes catch it. There's not a question on this. I think most of you know that there's drug sniffing dogs and that people smuggle drugs. What kind of evidence can be found or is found when they're trying to detect it? It can be pills, powders, and liquids, but sometimes it's botanical things like leaves or seeds or mushrooms, crystal meth. It's something that maybe has spilled or gotten leaked or soaked into clothing. Can also be, maybe more of a dangerous chemical versus a drug. It can also be found if someone comes in or if someone is involved in a crime, and they're going to detect drugs in their urine, in their blood, and just like we talked about with DNA, it can also be in their sweat and their saliva. So they can detect it where it's being smuggled, but it can also be detected on our body, in our body. So when they're packaging evidence, just like every other evidence we've talked about, it's got to be carefully stored, carefully labeled, chain of custody, all that good stuff. So none of that is really new, just kind of reviewing that it applies to toxicology too. So this, I think, is question number 4. So you might want to jot these down if you don't want to have to go back. What are 3 questions that a toxicologist needs to answer? So typically a toxicologist is dealing with someone who's brought in dead, but it could just be also someone in a hospital and the doctor is trying to figure out why this person is sick, and they think maybe they've been poisoned or exposed to a toxin, and the toxicologist is working in the lab running tests there at a hospital. Usually it's somebody that's working in a morgue, but could be either. So basically what they're trying to figure out is 3 questions. These are the 3 questions. What substances are there in this person's body? So they want to know, that's considered qualitative testing. Like, what substances are there? Is there cocaine? Is there arsenic? Is what actually is it? And then are there any illegal components of, maybe they found a whole bunch of Tylenol. That's not illegal. Somebody took a whole bottle of Tylenol. So what is it? Is it illegal? And then the quantitative is how much of each is present. So when I was talking about the famous people who have accidentally overdosed on Monday, if you remember, I was mentioning that it's usually considered an accidental overdose if they are able to figure out that the quantity of each substance present in the person is the normal recommended dosage. Like they're supposed to take 1 pill of this for allergies and 1 pill of one of these pills for depression and 1 of these for whatever, anxiety, I don't know. 1 of these for pain, and they took the normal amount, they just combined them dangerously. So that will sometimes answer questions as to, they took a whole bottle of something and the amount is huge, then they're like, that was probably an intentional overdose. But usually they rule them accidental if it has the normal recommended amount. So what is it? Are there any illegal components, and how much of it was in their blood, in their body? So we talked about presumptive testing. This is the other, number 5 is going to ask about presumptive testing and confirmatory testing, which goes on to the next slide. But remember, we did the blood presumptive testing. We were just testing those stains in the lab, trying to figure out if one of them actually was blood. So those are presumptive. They're just kind of like preliminary tests. And I think I mentioned this on Monday as well, too. You're hearing people testing presumptive positive for the COVID-19, meaning they still need a confirmatory test, but the initial testing was positive. And I think they're coming out with better tests now. So we're not hearing that quite so much with COVID. But anytime they're testing things in a lab, they're going to run it at least twice. The first one's going to be considered presumptive, just preliminary, and they're always going to do a second one, which is the confirmatory test. And that's going to be multi-step and very detailed, and they know 100% that it is exactly that substance. So make sure you know the difference between presumptive and confirmatory. I think that was question 5. So then the other thing, which I think is question 6 you'll answer in your homework questions, is what's the difference between acute poisoning and chronic poisoning? So this is something else that toxicologists have to figure out. Acute is, well, actually, let me go to the next page. Oh, this is one of the machines they use to test chemicals or test drugs and substances. I can't talk. Okay, so acute poisoning is a high dose in a short period. So like someone's trying to kill you and they put a ton of cyanide in your food. Or hopefully not. Or they somehow get you to drink something. And it's just one time. They're looking for an immediate result, and it's done very quickly. And we're going to look at some examples of those. This is going to be number 6 in your homework questions. So acute is a high dose, short period of time. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's over a course of days, but a short period of time, and a really high dose in it. And they're looking for usually immediate results. Chronic is something, if you hear people talk about chronic back pain, because they just have it all the time. So chronic poisoning is something that happens over a long period of time, in a lower dose or a lower quantity, and over time, it eventually can kill the person. So like there was that forensic files we looked at back last fall when we were talking about hair. I think I mentioned it on Monday. I think the guy's name was Eric Miller. I don't know why that popped in my head. But his wife had been like, it was more chronic because she was slowly giving him poison. I think it was arsenic. And he was like appearing sick. And then I think they figured out it was over like 4 months by looking at his hair, if I remember correctly, 3 or 4 months. And then that final dose was large because she wanted it to make it look like he'd been having health problems. And then when he died, it wasn't very suspicious. So that was a good example of actually both. But I want to show you guys, I don't know how far into this video we are. I don't have a timer here. I'm trying not to make this really long, guys, but if it's long, just stop it halfway and take a break. I'm trying to cover what I would normally cover in a class period in about 20 minutes, 20, 30 minutes. So here's some examples of acute poisoning, some cases you may or may not have heard of. So there was this crazy dude named Jim Jones, who was a cult leader, and there's something called the Jonestown Massacre you may have heard of. You might hear people refer to Guyana Punch, because it was in Guyana. And I'm going to show you a little video about it. And it's going to be an example of acute poisoning. So if you need to write down an example of a case of acute poisoning that was kind of a big deal, you could put Jim Jones and the Guyana Punch or Jonestown Massacre. He basically took cyanide and Valium and promethazine, I can't say that right, and basically put it in a grape flavored drink, and he forced hundreds of people, about 900, to commit suicide. Kind of crazy. He was a crazy cult leader, and I'm going to show you like a 2-minute video about him in just a second, because we would do that if we were in class. And then chronic poisoning, the case of the radium girls, it got cut off a little bit here. This is from like the early 1900s, so you probably haven't heard of it, but it's a good famous case of chronic poisoning. It actually, hold up, this chronic poisoning case is in, I think it's question, at the very end of the questions next week, you're going to be asked about the different case studies at the back of the book. And this is actually one of the case studies. So after you read about it, after we talk about it today, you might want to go back and read a little bit more about it and answer that question. I forget what question it is in the document. But anyway, so I want to show a couple of short videos about Jim Jones, which is an example of acute poisoning, and the radium girls. So you're going to have to hang with me here while I switch over to, let's see, we'll go here. And so basically Jim Jones was this humanitarian who killed 900 people and poisoned, it was about 270 children. This is the dude. He was crazy. He was this was in the 70s. This article goes through like his whole story of his life. But this video here, and I actually have it opened in YouTube over here because it's a much better quality. It's 14 minutes. We're only going to watch like the first 2 minutes and 20 seconds because it gives a good overview of the case. And then the rest of the video is them interviewing his adult son who survived. And you'll find out how in the video. So y'all, let's watch a little bit of this together. Oops. How do you? Okay.
Oh. Right. It was supposed to be
Okay, I'm going to stop it here, but you can actually, if you want to, you can probably find this video on YouTube, or I can always put it on the page. Yeah, so he was just a crazy cult leader. He literally killed a congressman and all those other people that had come with him, this delegation, because he was afraid they were going to go back to the United States and say, yes, it's a cult and there's people who want out. And so he like had him killed. And then he knew that they'd be coming for him. So that's what sparked him to go ahead and have everybody commit suicide. So, and if people tried to like not drink the punch, they just shot him. If people tried to run away, they shot him. So crazy guy. So it's kind of a famous thing if you've heard about it. If you haven't, now you have. So then this other one, the Radium Girls, you might not, this title's a little misleading. She may not have been the last Radium Girl. But anyway, basically, this is in like the early 1900s. I think it starts around 1917. To look at the article. It was in 1920s. Okay. So basically they discovered radium. Scientists discovered radium, and at first they thought that it was actually used in a lot of medicine and like creams and things like that, and people thought it was like this miracle drug. Okay, they didn't do a lot of testing on it at the time. They didn't know that the radioactive radium was going to kill people. Okay, so this is a really interesting case because it brings into question of why we have now the FDA that tests things before they didn't have anything like that in place in the early 1900s. So they start using radium, and they start figuring out that because it glows, they can use it to make glow in the dark watches. So they would hire young ladies to paint the numbers and the hands on the watches so that they would glow. And a big part of it was so that the soldiers could also use them because it was during the war and they could see at night and see their watches, and people started buying them like crazy. So they hired all these young women to work in factories and paint these watch faces with little brushes, and to get, you know how when you want to get something like, well, I don't usually stick a paintbrush in my mouth, but you'll see somebody put it in their mouth and wet it to make a fine tip. So they would dip it in the radium and paint it, and then put it in their mouth to get the paintbrush really pointy so they could get fine details painted on. So literally they were doing like hundreds, of times in their mouth a day. And over time their bones started to decay and their teeth fell out and jaws broke and bones broke. And it was just crazy. And the company, of course, never took a responsibility for it. And there was a big lawsuit. And again, we didn't have like unions at the time. We didn't have a lot of good labor laws protecting workers. So these are some of the early crazy things you'll read about if you study history about why we have labor laws and why we have the FDA to make sure things are safe. So I'm just going to show a trailer. They actually made a movie, a little indie movie, independent movie. And the movie trailer is kind of interesting to show a little bit about that. You can always watch it if you're bored.
You're paid 1 cent per dial. Your work suffers, Miss Cavallo. The 8 looks like a fat toddler.
This month's top painter, Josephine Cavallo.
We practice lying and feeling spaces. Studying. I have to be ready to be discovered and go to Hollywood. I want to sign a tomb like Tux. I'm an archaeologist. Joe, will you be ready in 5 minutes? Joe, come in, please. Joe. I don't know what's wrong with her. I'm busy. I'm noisy. I lost the two prisoners. Do you know what's wrong with me?
Absolutely. Nothing is worse.
I'm married. Indoors. We believe that exposure to radium can cause devastating tissue damage. Radium is good for everyone. Mrs. Meatfries, take American radium down. There's a lot of positive amounts of radioactive. Seems so crazy. I'm not losing my job for this. I've seen. Sorry. Hey, get down. Come here.
So, good movie if you are interested in something to watch during this lovely quarantining at home. Anyway, just like to give you a little more background on some of these stories because there's just so many stories out there, guys. So many cases we could look at. It gets a little depressing though. So anyway, those are some examples, more famous, big, huge cases. Obviously, there's lots of little examples, and there's tons of other examples about chronic poisoning from corporations, which I'll talk about that here in a second. We're getting there. Famous murders by poison. This is another case study in the back of your book, or not back of the book, back of the chapter. That we'll actually come back to talk about this a little bit more next week. We'll go back over the case studies. But this was ricin, which is a really dangerous poison that's made from castor beans, the castor bean plant. And basically, these were like spies in the 70s, Russian spies, and one of them was killed by being stabbed in the leg with an umbrella. And basically, they had fitted this really fine tip needle in the bottom of the umbrella, and it had a tiny little pellet of ricin, or a tiny little pellet that was full of ricin. And they're just guys just walking along, and he just gets kind of stabbed in the leg by this umbrella and doesn't even realize this fine needle has gone into his leg, and he dies a couple of days later. And then there was another Russian spy that actually lived. He was also, got a ricin pellet in him, but he was apparently wearing such thick clothing that it didn't go deep enough into his skin, and he managed to live. So we'll talk about more about that later. So we're wrapping up here for today. We've moved on to question 8. This will be question 8 in your notes about heavy metals, gases, poisons, and toxins. So you've got all kinds of different poisons we've talked about so far, but usually suicides, homicides, and accidental deaths have occurred due to exposure to heavy metals such as arsenic, lead, and mercury. Not usually, I'm sorry. That is how heavy metals, arsenic, lead, and mercury can result in people doing it intentionally for suicides or homicides to kill people or accidental. So We talked about how they go inside their body. When we were talking about drugs on Monday, it can either be ingested, inhaled, or absorbed. Same thing with heavy metals, or different gases or poisons. So sometimes it's a result of environmental exposure. The water is contaminated, or because the company's been dumping byproducts of whatever it is they're producing in local water supplies. That happens in America often. There's actually, you could probably look up a ton of cases about different lawsuits that have been brought on companies here in the US for poisoning the water in the communities that they operate in and causing cancer in members of the community. All around the world, we have pretty clean drinking water in America, but around the world, there's a lot of people who have water that's contaminated with arsenic that can cause, chronic poisoning. Mercury poisoning, again, also is something that comes up from companies dumping waste in water or land nearby. Lead. We used to have lead in paints, and then kids started getting sick because paint would chip in homes, and kids put everything in their mouths, and they started figuring out that, like, kids were dying of lead poisoning. So some different ways that it can get in your body. So, and different ways you can be exposed to it in the environment. So be aware. This is question 8. I think it asks, what are some heavy metals? Lead, mercury, arsenic, and how they've been linked to some deaths. So you might want to jot that down. This is actually in your book as well. It's just some more examples of some more information about lead, mercury, and arsenic, some sources of it, and then some of the symptoms. So you're welcome to go either pause this slide and look at it a little bit more, or just go back and look this up in your chapter. And then we're going to end here today. This is the last slide we'll talk about. And this will answer question number 9 in your homework questions. Is a lot of times there's lethal gases or lethal injections used, okay, that it falls under toxicology because it's different toxins that harm us. Gas chambers you guys are aware of, okay, World War II, Nazis, bad deal. Carbon monoxide can from engine exhausts. A lot of people use that to kill themselves. Hydrogen cyanide is what is used in our American penal systems, meaning like death penalty, like lethal injection. Carbon monoxide is listed twice here, sorry. People will sometimes commit suicide by, sitting in a running car and getting those fumes from carbon monoxide poisoning. So injections of, I want to make sure I read it right, potassium chloride or sodium pentothal, okay, those are actually hard to detect in toxicology labs. And so those sometimes are used to not accidentally, to kill people, and because they're a little bit harder to detect. So just being aware of what are some ways that lethal gases have been used. They were used in gas chambers. We use them. They're used to commit suicide by people inhaling carbon monoxide, and then lethal injections. We've actually injected it into people to, for the death penalty. So that's pretty much as far as I want to go today. On Friday, we will get into pesticides and herbicides and keep going. And we won't get through all of the slides this week, trying to break it into little chunks like we typically do. So your goal is to continue working on the questions. You need to have done through question 10, I think, by Friday is what I have at the top of that page. And then you need to have your forensic files video watched and your response sheet done by Friday too. Okay, so I think that's it for today. And hopefully I will see all of you later on today on Zoom, on the Zoom call. All right, see you later. Bye.